Hi, everyone. It's my real pleasure to open the first ever, the wartime offline discussion and presentation at the Kyiv School of Economics. We're a little bit shy today, so we kind of said 10 people, but I think there are like 30 here, everyone together. And remember, if there is a siren, we'll have to go downstairs because and we have our esteemed guest, and we don't want any bad publicity afterwards. We want more lectures to happen. Yeah, but I think
the guest should survive. That would be,
you know, I think it will be fine. It just the probability of something happening is here. You know, you can calculate it. It's probably smaller than you would get hit by a car in Europe, but still we don't want to have any misperception, right? So, but I think we have to work through the war. I think it's important to do that because academia and culture and arts are the fabric of the society, and the war tends to radicalize people. And we want to maintain the democracy, the vibrant democracy that we are protecting, that we are fighting for. And therefore, we have to continue to do what we have always been doing. I think it's much more important than sometimes we tend to realize. So I hope it's just, you know, the beginning of many, many events. In fact, I would like to have a fancy, in terms of intellectual input, conference on economics in Ukraine at the Kyiv School of Economics as soon as possible, maybe May, maybe June, to bring top intellectual leaders of the world to Kyiv and discuss what needs to be done now and what needs to be done in the future and what can be done. And Luis, it's been a pleasure interacting with you in real life and also on Twitter.
Yes.
Thank you very much for being such a good friend of Ukraine. You are in, you know, in the EU in politics now, but you are a fantastic scholar. So I can relate. I'm not such a fantastic scholar as you, but I try, you know, I also was in politics a little bit, but you're longer. So I think I can relate to your career. And so it's particularly precious and valuable for me that you are the first speaker, because it shows something that academia can do in real world. Not only think about and understand the world, but also change the world. So thank you very much. And yeah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's so wonderful to be here with all of you. And I mean, first of all, I would have said that I was very impressed by the Kyiv School of Economics, even if this wasn't happening in the middle of a war. I think what you're doing here, all the fundraising, the building, the scholarship, the policy work, everything you're doing is really very impressive. But if on top of that, you have that you're managing to stay open and to have seminar series and to do the policy work, when all of this is happening around you is really incredible. Many of us are very inspired by you. You know, we you know, in Europe, people tend to take freedoms for granted, and people in the European Union, people tend to, you know, be just discussing about the price of oranges and the common agricultural policy and all that, you know. And, you know, the European Union largely is an institution that is designed to transform quarrels about borders into quarrels about the price of oranges, right? We don't fight about where is your border. We fight into 5 o'clock in the morning to try to decide the quotas or etc. And now we see what's happening here, and we remember why Europe exists. It exists because we're looking for peace. We're trying to have a peaceful continent. And when I saw, and when many of us saw what was about to happen and what was happening to Ukraine, we made it our mission to do our little or our best effort to help you. And for me, everything I can do, and I can tell you, each one of you, I will do it. Okay, so this is my second visit here, and every time I'm more impressed with the Ukrainian people, with what you're doing and what you work. So count on me. And what I wanted to do today is to talk about sanctions and to talk about financial policy. So we have among the public. Some of you are some of the biggest experts on sanctions here, and some of you come from the banking community and can talk about the other half. So there are two halves here. There's going to be a liquidity, what about the budget and how do we fund this, and what about the sanctions and how do we really get this going. And the basic claim is going to be that if you think about the balance now, you know, these games that kids play with the balance up and down, the way Europe is tilting the balance now is really more for Putin than for Ukraine. We are putting a lot of money into buying energy, gas and oil from Putin, and we are putting less money to help Ukraine fight the war. And what I would like to do is to change the balance, that on the financing needs side, we help Ukraine much more. On the sanctions side, we really help Putin much less. That's really the big frustration and the big anger that some of us feel. And I've put some of you have seen a lot of effort into that. It's not to say that we haven't done anything. If you think about the Russia balance, we've put in the individual sanctions, we put these financial measures, the SWIFT, banning 7 institutions, and then some more in the last package. Transportation, energy, defense, the military technology bans on goods and media, on diplomacy. There have been a lot of efforts with Russia, many of them unprecedented. So I don't want to say we didn't do anything. And we also have helped Ukraine. There are there's a macrofinance program, there's a fundraising campaign that the President of the Commission did, a humanitarian aid package, a civil protection mechanism, the peace facility, the temporary protection mechanism. All of those things are non-trivial. I don't want to say they're trivial, but it's clear that they are not enough. And this is my way to show you that they are not enough. We have I don't know if this thing works. Do you see it? You see a little red dot? I don't really see it. Because of the type of screen. All right, perfect. So, I mean, on the Russia side of the balance, you see what has happened. We thought with the first package on that Sunday of the first Sunday of the war, that must have been the 27th or 28th. We thought we were going to really hit the financial system of Russia and create a bank panic. And there was a moment when it looked like there was going to be a bank panic, but then it started to be like, well, we're going to continue using Sberbank and using the biggest banks, Gazprom Bank, to pay energy. They're going to be getting a lot of money in hard currency, and that's going to be enough. And indeed, the ruble has basically gone back to its pre-war value. On the other hand, if you look at Ukraine, clearly we're not doing enough. I mean, okay, in a war, it's to be expected that your GDP drops, but it's really going to crumble. And of course, any economist looking at this is thinking hyperinflation, right? You're not thinking hyperinflation there, but you're thinking hyperinflation there. If we don't put the money here that is needed, then the central bank ends up having to print this money, and then we end up, well, we know where we end up. We end up with a financial system that is not viable and with an economy that is not viable. So as I told you, I divide this talk into two halves. One is, how do we balance away from stop financing Putin by moving forward with the sanctions, and I will have some concrete suggestions to discuss, and how do we get some money to Ukraine immediately, and I will also have some suggestions. On both of these things, we'll have a dialogue at the end. I very much want to listen to you and to hear you. I mean, we are writing things in op-eds in Europe and writing resolutions in the parliament and pushing things forward. And of course, your input is absolutely invaluable for that. So let me just go to the first question. How are we going to stop financing Putin? This is how much money we have spent into this war in the size of Putin. I don't have those synchronized, so I forgot to pass both, sorry. 37 billion is what we sent, 12 billion in oil, 24 billion in gas. This is the payments to Russia between the 24th of February and right now. Now, this is a huge discussion, and it's starting to tear Europe apart, and it's going to really tear Europe apart. It's going to be a huge, huge controversy, because basically many of us claim that there is sufficient evidence that leads us to expect that there is no collapse of the European economy. This, if you stop gas. This is the Council of Economic Experts documentation summarizing the different studies. The main one is the Bachmann et al., but there have been work by ECB, by Deutsche Bank Research, etc. And basically, if you look at it, you see that the amount of the GDP drop for Europe is 2-3 points in the worst case scenarios. Even if it was 4, it seems manageable to me. The main reason is that if you look at it just simply from engineering perspective, there are basic good substitutes. I mean, the whole discussion that you see is about the elasticity of substitution, right? What people wonder is how much is it going to be possible to replace that gas by other fuels, that oil by other fuels? And of course, the German government basically, which is talking about hunger, is basically saying these things you can't substitute. The truth of the matter is you can substitute gas, as I'll show you, because a lot of it is used for energy production, but you can even substitute industrial uses because you can import the industrial goods. Okay, then the industry is not producing. Well, we've done that with COVID. We've just subsidized the industry to stay closed. That was the hotel and the restaurant industry. So even in that case, it's not a disaster. But the point is there is actually a solution for most of them. Coal, there is a lot of spare capacity. Oil, we're talking about 3 million barrels per day of crude and 1 million barrels a day of oil products. There is enough in the OPEC right now. And gas, which is really the place where everybody is having a fight, is one where I think it can be solved. So what can you do with gas? The big number for gas is 150 billion cubic meters of gas, which is imported by Europe from Russia a year. That's what we need to replace. It seems that 2/3, we are importing around 1 to 2 billion cubic meters of LNG per week right now. So if you're importing 2 billion cubic meters a week, if we continue to do that, we might replace of the 150, 100 just with LNG boats, okay? It's maybe optimistic, but we are importing a lot. And basically there's a spare capacity. There's going to be an increasing floating LNG terminals. And basically what you need to do is to invest in reconfiguring the pipelines. So first thing, we can import LNG. That's the first substitute. Second thing, we have 32 billion cubic meters on storage. I told you 150 is what we need to replace. 2/3 could be imported via LNG, that would be 100. You have 32 more potentially. But also, the truth of the matter is that the governments are not doing enough. I want to give you 2 examples. The first one is the gas fields in Groningen. Groningen is the biggest gas field in Europe. It's 500 billion cubic meters of gas that is stored, and we're going to close it. Okay, the plan is to close it. And the reason is that it has created some earthquakes and the citizens are worried. I want to tell you that they are worried, okay, and it's going to be closed. You could import, you could substitute the whole three years worth of Russian imports with this if you don't close it. But even if you, I mean, if you think about it more realistic and you think how many years worth of after the LNG, so there is 50 left. I told you, you could do 10 years of imports. Okay, so look, this is how much it was producing. You see, it was producing up to 90 billion cubic meters, and it's been going down. So the average has been around 50, which is pretty good because that's what we need. And basically, there's been a political decision to kill it. Okay, you see that it's going away. So there's been these mini earthquakes, and there is political pressure to close it. The truth of the matter is, I mean, the Netherlands, there's no discussion of opening this back up, right? But if you actually calculate how much this is worth at current prices, what you discover is that 500 billion cubic meters are at the price of 100, which is now a little bit the megawatt hour. By the way, one thing for those of you who do energy, which is extraordinarily bizarre with energy, is that you have to keep 3 metrics in mind all the time. You cannot just say, oh, I'm going to remember billion cubic meters and I will be done. It's not like that. You have to remember billion cubic meters, joules and kilowatt hours, and megawatts, and make all the conversion. So it's a bit complicated. But look, basically right now, the billion cubic meters translate into billion of euros. So that's pretty nice after you do all these complications. So there's 500 billion euros to compensate Dutch citizens who are concerned. It seems to me that if you go to the 500,000 inhabitants on Groningen and tell them, okay, I'll keep this open and I'll give you 1 million euros, I bet you they would vote yes in a referendum. That's my guess. But nobody's asking this, okay? This is not a question on the table. So second thing that Europe could do, look at this interesting comparison. Left, we're talking about Germany, okay? And I said, Europe is not doing enough with gas, Netherlands, and now Europe is not doing enough with gas, Germany. So this is the natural gas of Germany. 40% comes from Russia, okay? Look how much of the gas is used in power. Around a little bit over 30% of gas is used in power. So what it seems is that if you were to not use gas in power generation, you wouldn't need to do anything to industry. They're saying, oh, gas is so important for industry, you have to shut down the chemical process. You're like, hey, this is mostly power. So all we need to do is to find other ways to produce power. There must be some other ways. Well, there are. This is the gas gross power produced in Germany in terawatt hours. So this is now not a rate, but this is the stock, how much was produced in total. And what you see is that there were 163 terawatt hours of coal. There were, in the last year, there were 89 terawatt hours of natural gas and 69 of nuclear. Now, nuclear is going to be shut down. This was in 21. There were 6 nuclear reactors. 3 closed at the end of last year, 1.4, 1.3, 1.2. 3 are closing this year. You must be thinking, wow, they're so worried about gas. They must be opening all these nuclear plants. No, that's totally out of the table. Totally out of the table. Nobody is talking about starting this Brockdorf and Grundemeyer or stopping the closure of those 3. So if you actually do the numbers and you start thinking, okay, so how many terawatt hours can I get with these nuclear plants? You basically figure out that with the 3 and 3 that are closed, you can already get 8 terawatt hours. So if you just went down a couple of years, 3 years more, you will have enough to replace the entire nuclear production. And the calculations are there. I'll put it up in the website so you guys can do it. So that's the calculation. Assuming that the similar power needs us in 2021, half the 90 terawatt hours that natural gas provides, you could do with LNG. The nuclear reactors could produce, basically you do the sums, and to cut Russian import, you need the 3 nuclear reactors that were just closed and 4 more. Now, I'm just using half of it from LNG, okay? So I'm saying LNG produces, so the solution is 60, 20, 20. 60 is non-Russian, 20 is LNG, ships, and 20 is nuclear. And you get it, okay? So now, what does the German government say about this? There is a report of the economics minister, and those are the 7 excuses or reasons they give to not doing this. The first one is legal approvals. The government says they have to change the law. Say, hey, you're the government, man. I mean, of course, just change the law. Second, safety. Well, they've increased the safety ratio, so now to open these nuclear plants, they wouldn't be safe enough. Okay, do you prefer to be nuked by Putin or to have a 1 in a billion risk assessment? I mean, just move your safety record. Fuel, we would need some new fuel, okay, spare parts, personnel, you can get the people who are retiring back into the work. Economic considerations, you need to grant them for 3-5 years, okay, grant them for 3 or 5 years. And energy replacement, you would need to keep using some coal and gas, they say, while you are starting this up. So it seems every argument to me seems like an excuse. And there has been a German a German think tank who's actually done the calculation. The orange is Russian gas. So these are the supplies of natural gas. It's basically the same numbers I was giving you before. And they have 3 supply assumptions: baseline, maximum, and realistic, and 3 demand scenarios. The baseline is 2022 past consumption, maximum supply is no maintenance, so it's realistic, and realistic supply is taking into account the neighboring countries. Then there are 3 demand models, which are the baseline, medium, and optimistic. Baseline is the one that has a little bit of savings, similar to a few years back when there was some expensive gas. Here there is twice as many savings, and here there are pretty large savings. Okay, so if you combine the supply and demand models here, what you see is that basically in the scenario, which is basically with a realistic supply, so look at realistic supply and medium savings, you actually, this German think tank thinks you basically are essentially there. You have a tiny gap that you cannot do. So they basically say they are not using all these other things that I'm putting in. They're just basically saying it can be done. So why can it not be done? So tap more LNG via imports, increase pipeline imports, and reduce energy consumption. That's basically what all that is needed. So that's my I don't know, frustration. We've been trying to say this for a long time. We've been telling people, we've been telling politicians, we wrote a resolution in parliament which says this, etc., but the governments are not there. Basically, it remains very, very controversial. So what can we do? So basically, my main consideration here, and I don't want to go over time, so because I have 2 things to do. My main consideration here is to go out of the all or nothing logic. We have a silly logic now. Some people are saying, we can't do gas. Other of us are saying, yes, you can do it. And then we are all stuck. So how do we get out of the simple all or nothing logic? The way we can get out of the simple or nothing logic is by introducing a tariff, and I will say how. The point is the price to EU buyers raises, what the suppliers get goes down to the extent that they are to some extent that they are elastic, they don't have other alternatives, and as a result, you can actually do much better, and I will show you why. This is a paper we just published in Vox EU. Vox EU, by the way, for those of you who don't know, is running with Dominic Runner and Beatrice Vedder and myself, Di Mauro and myself, we're running a series on the Ukraine war, the economic consequences of war, we're calling it, and we put more or less 1 or 2 articles every day. So there's a lot of good reading on economics. And John Soom from MIT, a student from MIT, produced this beautiful, analysis, very, very clearly told. He basically says, look, suppose that we have completely inelastic demand. We need the gas. We can't live without it. If you put a tariff, the Russians we need the same amount. So everything is the same. We pay a tariff. And since it's a tax that goes to the EU taxpayer, we recover it. There's no losses, no gains. That's the worst case scenario where we really need the gas. We pay more. We don't reduce consumption. Too bad. But if you have any elasticity, then what happens is, so there is a supply curve and there is a demand curve. Consumers can adjust. What happens is the standard tariff analysis. What happens is you get consumers are going to look, their demand is a little bit lower when the price goes up. That's logical. But the suppliers also are going to have to accept, apart from a lower quantity, a lower price. And that's less money for putting. And I can move this curve wherever I want. Okay, I can go to 0 supply. I don't need to say no gas tomorrow. I just need to put a tariff on Putin's gas. How do we design a tariff? The design of an optimal tariff is a very kind of, it has, I was going to say very intuitive, but it has some counterintuitive things. It was something done in 1951 that has been improved now in recent analysis. The point is that a tariff is not going to matter on how much we need it. It's just going to matter on the elasticity of supply. So basically, here are the things that determine the tariff. And this is what I think is not so unintuitive. The tariff is going to be higher when Russia has no alternatives but to sell it to us, okay? Their supply is very inelastic. That's how we are going to explain it. So first of all, how inelastic is the Russian supply? Well, it's quite, actually people say, well, they can always sell their oil or the gas somewhere else. Not so easy, not so easy. On the gas, everybody understands it comes by pipe. It's not so easy to sell that Siberian gas, comes through pipeline, Nord Stream 1 to Lubmin. It's not so easy to divert. But think about oil. So the EU and UK are big buyers, 63%. If you add US, Turkey, and Japan, who would presumably join, we basically have 80%. Can they so easily kind of find buyers for, you are selling something and you have to find buyers for 80% of your merchandise, or are you going to lose a lot? Probably you're going to lose a lot, okay? Second, Russia has pre-existing gas pipelines and oil pipelines that come straight into Europe. Third, there are basically big gaps between the cost and the price, which means they're willing to accept a lower price. And finally, we already observed that they are accepting a big gap between the euro price and the other oil. So it's actually clear that they actually have to be stuck. How much more that gap could be? Maybe we can push that price much further down. So my point here is a tariff is actually desirable, and how far we need to go, it's actually only dependent on how much are we willing to inflict ourselves pain in order to inflict pain on them. But notice, all of this money, the difference with the tariff from other solutions being talked is that all of this money, the EU tariff revenue in the middle, is money that the taxpayer collects and gets back. So the European Union gets this, puts this tariff, gets the revenue, and can bring it back to the consumer. So it's not pure pain. You can actually get basically consumers to be as well off. So that's my first point. Don't get stuck in the 0-1 discussion, gas ban, no gas ban. I mean, I am gas ban. I've been saying gas ban every time, but let's just start to at least hit them with the tariff, and then we start moving forward. The second thing I wanted to tell you about is money, is finance. And the war, as you know, is having a tremendous cost, and there's been some interesting work. Timothy, in particular, has done some work on the reconstruction. There's been a recent CEPR Vox EU volume. So basically, big drop in production, big destruction of physical capital, and some big destruction of human capital. But that's not what I wanted to talk about today. What I wanted to talk about is what Oleg Ustenko said in Reuters this weekend. He also told me 10 days ago, and I mean, it's pretty shocking. Ukraine has running now a monthly deficit of 8 billion. How big is 8 billion? Well, the GDP was around 170, but it's supposed to drop by 40%. So maybe the GDP is 100. Suppose the GDP is 100. We're running 8% deficit per month. Okay, 8% GDP deficit per month. That's a lot, okay? That is a lot. So the government says we need to make up 50 billion to just be relaxed and be comfortable. So what I wanted to talk in this second part is I told you about tilting the balance in the opposite way. So we were tilting the balance towards Russia, now less because we put this tariff and we want to tilt it more towards Ukraine. How can we do it? So this is what we are doing right now. We said we've bought 37 billion worth of gas from Putin, and we've given 24 billion in total, 22 billion, sorry, in total to Ukraine, counting bilateral aid on the left and non-bilateral aid on the right, 12.9 plus 9. That's the total amount. These are figures from this week. Okay, these are the Kyiv Institute figures that came up just now. So the gap is going to be hard to close. I mean, there are some reserves in the central bank. There is 25 billion of reserves, which is kind of reassuring in this context. But it's also true that you have all these payment needs. It's kind of a pity to be spending the money from the reserves on repayment if you can do something better. The opportunity cost, in other words, of the repayment is very large. And also, it's going to get harder and harder because we're going to see these big jumps in yields, and we're going to see this drop in the currency as well. So sorry, I was going to say about external debt, what share of the debt is external. You know, there was a big restructuring. Let me show you, that's the exchange rate, sorry, that I mentioned before. This is the restructuring of the debt of Ukraine, and there was an agreement with all the creditors. There were a few institutional investors that were the main creditors, and these are all bonds. The reason I'm putting them here is because they are bonds that are pretty easy to restructure. They're bonds that have a collective action clause, like footnotes, okay, parentheses. A collective action clause is a mechanism that allows a certain share of creditors to impose a restructuring. So normally in the past, pre-2004, if you guys all lend money to me, I'm a country, okay, you all lend money to me, and I say, oh, I can't pay, I need the agreement of all of you to restructure, okay? The problem with that agreement is that there is one person there who's a vulture fund who bought 10 billion and he, or 10 million or whatever, I mean, depends on the size of the country, sits on the chair and says, sorry, I'm not interested, and they want to be made whole. So they can block, okay? Now, this has the most modern and the most perfect collective action clauses known to mankind, okay? Very flexible. 75% of the creditors can agree on a restructuring and 50% of a particular issuance. So it's pretty reasonable. It's very hard for one of these funds to stop it. And also, by the way, which fund is going to take the wrath of the world stopping a restructuring? Now, I'm not talking about restructuring which you stop paying. I'm not talking about restructuring where you say we're going to be forcefully reducing the nominal payment. No, I'm talking about restructuring where, and I will give details in a second, where you postpone the payment of the debt for a few years, you stop paying interest, etc. We'll see in a second with some details. Okay, so what are the things that are on the table that we can do? There are 5. 3 are straightforward. I'm not going to tell you anything that you don't know. Well, maybe a little bit in 2, but 4 and 5 are unusual and a bit potentially more interesting. One is increased financial support. So it's like, okay, we don't have enough aid for Ukraine, we need to give more, okay? There is liquidity, I mean, we have immediate needs of 50 billion, and we say we got 24 billion coming, and it's also going to other things like weapons and so on. Second, what I was starting to hint when I showed you the collective action clauses and the debt issuance. That was around, this one was 1.2, 1.23. And okay, there is this one, which is very interesting. This is a GDP linked security. This is like a share. Okay, you only pay when your GDP grows sufficiently, but it has to be over 125 billion. So I think that's probably not going to be a problem for a while. It gets restructured on its own. It's not great because it's about growth. It's not about levels. So it has something weird. Let me just tell you quickly. If you wanted to link something to my income, I would like it to be, if I earn 110 and 120, if one year I earn 50 instead of 100, but then my growth is 10%, that's not necessarily good news because I'm really low. The way the Ukrainian GDP-linked bonds work is that they just matters how much you grow this year. If you grow more than 3.5%, more than 4%, etc. With one little thing, which is you have to have GDP over 125 billion. And I think that's not going to be the case. So all of those can be restructured relatively easier. How could we do it? So my point here is not to go to the creditors and become a pariah and be in all sorts of trouble. My point is that you can easily extend maturities of all this. So it's a bond exchange where you say, guys, I need a few more years. I'm going to stop paying interest until the war is over, and I want some fresh cash. So maybe 2 or 3 billion extra cash, and a bond exchange with maybe new liquidity provision from the IMF, I think is perfectly feasible. Is this huge? It's not going to be huge, but it's going to be interesting, as well as the diaspora bonds that the government is already considering with all you have the lack of having all of these community abroad. So there is a precedent which has happened in COVID. Basically, during the COVID pandemic, there was a debt saving suspension initiative that could help Ukraine right now save quite a few billion euros this year. So this was Ecuador, just to show you one case. Ecuador had the 10 billion liquidity relief for 5 years, drop in average interest rate, average time duration, and debt service dropped with these kind of restructuring because of an oil shock. So it can be done. Third, we can introduce additional loan guarantees, and I will tell you one particular way to do it through SDRs. This is insufficient, but we need to step up, okay? So one thing you could do is you could say, okay, so Ukraine can issue debt backed up the European Union, and this debt only gets paid when Ukraine joins the European Union. Something like that, that gives an incentive to Europe to really hurry up because they want this debt to be repaid. That would be one way to do it. Now, two strange ideas, or more unusual ideas. One is the SDR allocation. So during the pandemic, the IMF gave a 650 billion allocation of SDRs. So somebody like France has 72 special drawing rights. This is like central banking currency. It's like gold. Think that they gave gold to everybody. You're supposed to put it in your bank account. So basically, the countries have this money and they wanted to use it for development when they noticed they didn't need it. And the ECB said, no, you can't use this money. Impossible. And the ECB, I have the statement from the ECB here, and says the claims remain liquid and you cannot just use them for anything. You cannot use them to develop multilateral development banks. I think the ECB would have to change its mind, okay? So if Europe uses SDRs to guarantee, for example, debt from Ukraine, to issue debt that is actually backed by the SDRs, or even to give it to Ukraine in the form of grants and loans, I think the ECB would have to accept it because that's a political decision, and that's the end of the story. Finally, so the EU has had a very successful issuance of bonds, which were related to the pandemic, the Recovery and Reconstruction Fund. So we came together and we issued debt into the market that we could convert into loans and grants from the different member states. The reason we could do that was because of an emergency. Well, now there is an emergency. And I think we can also do that. If Ukraine needs 50 billion, the European Union could take care of half of that, half of the issuance. And again, make sure that it's only repaid when Europe is, when Ukraine is in the European Union or is growing, etc., etc. And we could even issue it as perpetual bonds. You know that the perpetual bonds have been something that have been used by countries like the UK to fund the Napoleonic Wars. There is a tradition of this. We could potentially do that and further reduce the cost to Europe. So I gave you two basic ideas. I think that you guys are fighting for the freedom of us. I think that Europe needs to change the sanction discussion to start doing something. And I think a tariff on gas would be a good idea from an economics perspective. And I think we need to be creative in finding ways that Europe can channel money to Ukraine. And I think one way to do it is we could use perpetual debt, but we could, on top of that, use the Recovery and Reconstruction Fund to get this money guaranteed by the whole European Union, like we have been doing with the recovery money. So those are my two main points. I hope I didn't cover too much or get too much. No, it's actually exactly the time. So thanks very much. So I'm happy to take as many questions as you have, and also not just questions, but much more interesting than questions, suggestions, because many of you know, obviously, the Ukrainian economy a million times better than me, and many of you have been working on sanctions, finance, etc. And the hope would be that I can also learn stuff that I can bring back to the parliament, etc. So please feel free to offer suggestions, criticism, say something, well, I don't like it. Starting with you, Timo.
Luis, you know, there is an air raid siren just a minute ago started when you were doing the slide number. Yeah. So we probably have to kind of, Kyiv.
Well, if there is,
formally,
there
we
is,
we have to go. So, but we can discuss questions in shelter.
Okay, let's discuss questions in shelter.
All right. So my apologies to people. We'll try to connect through Zoom in a couple of minutes. Actually, maybe it's on someone's device, but we'll see if we can do it.
This floor definitely.
Yeah, it's a little bit, you know. So we promised to everyone that we will. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, we might do Q&A online or something. Yeah, but for now we're gonna wrap it up and go to the shelter. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we will resume. I have the camera. I will be your operator, the camera guy.
Oh, you want me to start?
So
okay, so we had left it. We had left it at the Q&A. Thank you. Did you continue? Yeah. Okay, so we had left it at the Q&A, and what I had said is, I'm really delighted that the people I have here are very knowledgeable about the two parts of the issues that I talked about, which are sanctions and fiscal situation. So on those things, questions, but not just questions, but comments, thoughts, disagreements, ideas are very welcome. So who wants to start? I have one, I have two, I have three, I have four, I have. You're the moderator, so I don't have to do anything.
clockwise.
Okay, now show her. Yeah, maybe you can walk to her.
Excuse me.
A little bit about this scenario that Russia could start pretending that they stopped the war, and the European Union will cancel part of the sanction or all of the sanction. What is the possibility of this act from your point of view?
So, so the question, just because we had a little problem with the camera, the question was, imagine that Putin says tomorrow, oh, we're stopping, we're happy with Donbas, Crimea, etc., and we just want the sanctions to go off. What's the risk that Europe says, okay, fine, now we're happy, we go back to the status quo ante? I think things are never going to go back to the start. I think that there is a clear consciousness that what we have done over all these years, kind of getting too cozy with Putin, has been really, you know, people say, oh, you have to be realistic, and that's not realistic. I mean, when people tell you that you have to be realistic, cynical people are usually wrong. Okay, it's the opposite. You have to have strong principles and act clearly, and that's the economically right thing to do most of the time. In this case, so I would say it's not going to go to the start, but you're right. The temptation of the US and Europe to say, Putin says, okay, I'm going to stop. You just need to remove the sanctions. The temptation to say, fine, is going to be strong. I think we should oppose it. And I think the way we need to do it, and we haven't done this, is to have a set of conditions for lifting the sanctions, which are explicit. And I think the conditions should include the end of the occupation of any parts of Ukraine. And the difficulty, of course, is that if he stops the violence and he continues the occupation, we go into this kind of difficult situation where there are two lines in Donbass and he's throwing bombs, and Europe is like, okay, this is kind of this situation post 2015, right?
Yes.
And that's a very bad situation.
You might say there is no.
Yeah, no, that is unacceptable. I don't think we can accept that. But you're right that that's a risk, and you're right that we need to do everything possible to avoid it. Good question.
Okay, so clockwise, there was another.
Okay, so
You go.
No, we will reiterate your question.
Oh, why do you move it like this? I think it's cool to see them.
Hello.
Maybe you switch the camera.
said instead of embargo, we should do tariffs because tariffs could allow for gradual.
Not instead. I want them.
Okay.
I am. I've written all the time. I've written a resolution parliament. I was the main writer. I've written the Politico. I've written everywhere. Timothy can say about what I've done. I am the hardest person pro embargo. All I'm saying is maybe we need to start somewhere on gas. I think on oil it's going to happen anyway, but on gas we need to start somewhere.
So that's the question. Like, see with SWIFT, right? Some banks were sanctioned, some not. It doesn't really work.
It doesn't do anything.
Yes,
Because the financial system is like a river, right? It just wants to go down. If I say I'm going to dam 2/3 of the river, that's like, okay, all the water goes around the 1/3. Doesn't do anything. The money wants to go from somebody who wants to pay for gas to somebody who sells gas. He's going to find a way to pay. Goes to the bank, says, no, this bank doesn't take it. Okay. Goes to her bank. Hey, your bank takes it? Yeah, sure. So I go. That's
question
do anything.
is, what might be if we start with tariffs, that would alleviate the political pressure, saying, yeah, but tariffs, well, why go for the ban? And that's it. So how do you?
This is a great point, right? It's always when you do an incremental thing, the risk is that that's enough to say, well, then we don't need to do any more things. So that's a great point. I think the only way the tariffs would make sense is if they are the start of a ratcheting down. Now we can say, look, this is the tariff today, and in 2 months it's going to be this, and in 3 months it's going to be this, in those 4 months it's going to be that. You are going to need that because otherwise, you're right. It's like, no, we're only charging 20% more for the Russian gas. It's like, well, that's really not what we are looking for. So this is, I have not been advocating tariffs until today, until these days. Today in The Economist, there's an article where they interviewed me and I explained them this tariff idea and so on. And this has been the reason, right? That if you give an easy solution, then people will take it, or an easy air. But I fear that the alternative in gas is going to be taking too long. I had one here, and then one here.
Okay. So there is all the evidence already that oil embargo is possible. So even German think tanks, European think tanks, everyone wrote that it's possible to do with all the levels of detail. And European Parliament has evidence.
Yes.
So like, why it's not happening? And there are so many countries that don't import like 30%, they import 10% from Russia. Why it's not happening for that long? Like what should be done differently?
I think that there's some countries where the politicians have gotten into this story that it's going to be catastrophic, and now they are not willing to go back. I don't have a good explanation. I think that Europe should do it, and I think you're going to see it. Like all West August, I think you're going to see that oil, the pressure is so strong that they're going to have to announce oil for November or something. No, I think you're going to see it. But you're right, it is doable, and it's a crime that we're not doing. So I hope that we do it in the next package of sanctions. We should do oil and gas. That's what the Parliament says.
Okay, so
All right, thank you for the stuff with the numbers presentation. It's great ideas there. And thank you very much for coming in here. It's quite brave here. And thanks for having this Q&A session in Shelter. Is it your first time in Shelter?
It's my first time in Q&A.
Congratulations.
It's going to be memorable for the rest of my life, however long it lasts.
So the question basically is, what do you think? What's your perception on whether people across Europe, I mean, average consumers, whether they are ready to pay additional costs for whatever it takes to put on the embargo for?
There are two things, which are additional cost and whatever it takes. That's the whole country, right? I mean, whatever it takes, I think that it's very interesting, right? When you ask the public opinions, including in Germany, the public opinions are very strong. They want the oil and gas embargo. People feel really bad about this. They really want to do it. The politicians don't trust them. The politicians think, yeah, you say this, but when you start to see your gas bill or your oil bill go up, you're going to vote somebody else. You know what I mean? Like, public opinion really is strong with Ukraine in every country. The politicians are just distrustful of how strong that commitment is. So I think that it's a question of finding that path that allows us to carry the public opinion without changing, right? Because the public opinion now will support all of this. So one very clear proof that where the public opinion is how the parliament voted on the sanctions when we voted last week. So I was the main rapporteur for this. I wrote the resolution. So I was negotiating with all the other groups, etc. And there was an amendment that said immediate class. The amendment passed, and the resolution with that amendment overwhelmingly passed. Nobody dared to vote against. Why don't they dare to vote against? Because they know their voters are asking for it. So the voters are there. It's just that we need to get the politicians to believe their voters. It's a bit strange, but that's how it is.
Is it relevant countries of the EU, by the way, like the voters are there, or
I would say that the three countries that we have seen more reluctant are Germany, Austria, and Hungary. They are the three. I think, I mean, France has a presidential election on Sunday, right? So that makes the debate more complicated. But I do think that France is going to be leading. Bruno Le Maire, even in an electoral campaign, the finance minister this week said it's completely for an immediate oil embargo. So that proves that I think France is really going to be willing to lead. I think you will see an oil embargo pretty fast. And I also think that if you look at the debate in Germany, that it's been so costly for the SPD because everybody's looking at them. I think internationally, I think the pressure is building for more weapons we haven't talked about because that's not my part, and also for stronger sanctions. Yes.
The same person.
Gemello, no, Julio. But una cerveza, por favor. I just wanted to tell how much we are thankful for support of Spain, for me, because I'm a little bit aware of how Spanish internal policy is made. So for me, the socialists, Pedro Sanchez, and they are supporting Ukraine. I'm quite sorprendido for the level, and I'm quite sorprendido because of his visit today in Ukraine. Can you just explain us, am I right to be sorprendido or not? Because for social government, it's not so regular.
To be expected. Yeah. Okay. So I think that the government's position on this, indeed, it's a bit divided. There is a coalition between the socialists and the communists. So they have some really like not to be trusted with any of these things. But the socialist government is pretty solid. Has a good Ministry of Defense, and he has a strong position on this. And I think that on helping, and I think I agree with you that it's very good that Pedro Sanchez was here today. Maybe heard I was coming, so he had to come to but I think that the Socialist Party has a tradition that is more Atlanticist maybe than you would imagine. They were in favor of the exit from NATO until '82, but in '82 they called a referendum to remain in NATO, and they went in. So it's a complicated government, but the moderate pro-European parties right now in control, and that's good. No, yes. Thanks.
I have two issues. First, Ukrainian government sent to European Union and US and Great Britain and other countries more than 5,000 of persons who are responsible for this aggression, including all military high-level officials, including the heads of the republics of Russia who helped Putin to take this invasion, because we know that a lot of people from National Republic of Russia killed Ukrainians here near the Kyiv. And but today we have only 1,300 people in all sanction lists of all countries. So my question is, how can we have a fast track of this process? Because we already have a list of the people who are responsible with justification for the sanctioning. How can we have a fast track for this process, and who are the decision makers we need to address it?
So the sanctions policy is, so just to give you a 30 seconds course in European decision making, there are laws on which we have the competences, the parliament and the governments, the council and the parliament, the co-legislators. So when we do a law on the market, on internal market, on the telephones, on the pay, on the whatever thing has to do with the environment, with agriculture, we do it together. And decisions that have to do with foreign policy, we as legislators have nothing to say. The sanctions are put by the council, by the governments. It's a council decision that gets passed and goes straight. We don't vote. All we do is make noise and ask. Okay, we are going to make noise and ask. We're going to have next week with Kyiv Verhofstadt, we're going to have an event to
He said
6,000.
Need to be.
We're going to have an event to push for the 6,000 list. We're going to aim to have a resolution for the 6,000 list. And we believe, like you believe, that all of these intermediate people are very important because, you know, the oligarchs always have options. But the guy who is like the governor, mayor or something, and he has a villa in Spain or in, you know, these people don't have like 20 villas. They have a villa, you know, and if they can't use it, that hurts. So I think it's really important to target this set of people. And from Parliament, you'll hear us a lot in the next few weeks. We're going to do a lot of noise with that 6,000 list or 5,000 more.
One more question.
Just a second.
Today, Ukrainian Parliament voted the law that allows to confiscate the Russian assets in Ukraine, the sovereign assets and the assets of people who are responsible for the aggression in the administrative procedure. For example, not criminal, like civil confiscation in corruption cases.
Yeah.
Before this day, just one country have the procedure like this, the US from 1977.
And they used it.
Yes, and I won't ask you to raise this question in European Parliament in European countries, and we drafted this law in with the in the line of the European Convention of Human Rights.
Do you have a version in English? I would love to see that law. I would love to see that law. So first of all, I promised to look it up and to take it serious. There was a sixth point in that presentation of ways to get money, which was the 350 billion euros confiscated in seized, frozen reserves of the Russian central bank. We have that money there. We could say, look, the longer the war is going to last, the worse for you, because we're going to be paying for the Ukraine effort from that money. When I talk to lawyers about it, they go up in arms. I mean, they say, look, in order to seize money, you can use the procedure which is administrative to freeze money, but in order to confiscate it, you're going to have a criminal law court that says that this particular person was involved with this particular decision. And once a link is established, you can assign responsibility, but you cannot take her assets without proving that she was herself or he was himself, etc. So if you have a solution that you think is within the convention, then we definitely want. What's the solution? How does that work?
It's the same procedure that is in the Convention Against Corruption. When you confiscate assets in a civil case without any criminal offense. It's the same procedure, like in this convention.
Okay,
I know it because I work for 17 years as a prosecutor, and now I'm the head of the Agency on Corruption Prevention. It's a procedure that I think is in Spain legislation too.
Yeah, in Spanish legislation, there's a procedure to seize the money for drugs, for example, or for corruption, and you put it in some, police depot, and it stays there. But I don't know if you can actually confiscate it. I mean, yes,
you can.
Without criminal decision that this person was responsible. Okay, we will look at this. I mean, it's very, very important. It's a complicated legal process. I've looked at it 3 times since the war started. I actually had a conference call with 7 or 8 experts, and they were all like, "Oh, you can do that. You can do that." Basically, They say it's going to be more trouble than it's worth because we're going to have legal cases and and at the end we're going to take forever. So, but I think that would be great. You have 350 billion. You need 50 hopes. There is the first 50 done, right? That would be the easiest way to do it. But I'm not sure if legally that's.
Follow up on this one. Like these 350 follow up. Just these 350. So in order to get to them, let's assume that some legislative changes can happen. Talk about the EU Parliament, but again, this is more like recommendative measures going to be. So which legislation of what countries do you think should be amended in this case? So the parliamentary decision should be taken.
I think it's not going to be a European. I don't think it's going to be European legislation. It's going to be a specific national laws in each particular country, which will be different, right? That's the thing.
Well, my question about the Russian attempts to influence public sentiments in the European Union. So currently we see that Russian government trying to message that next sanctions will affect, first of all, European citizens, and creating the narrative that supporting Ukraine, it is very high price for Europeans. So what do you think? Is Europe ready to deal with it? And is this risk can really lead to some weakening of sanction in the future?
No, I think both questions are related to things we discussed. On the weakening of sanctions in the future, yes, we know public opinions have short memories, and is well taken, and your point well taken that if people can't stop seeing people dying in the streets, they are going to want everything to go back, prices to go down, etc. Europe is going to diversify its energy for sure. I mean, now this is an extra impulse. We have the climate. Now we have Putin. I mean, people are going to go to renewables, etc. So, I mean, Russia will probably never have as much power as they had 4 or 5 months ever again, 4 months ago. But on the second, on the first part of the question, which we discussed with the polling, etc., I think the polling shows that people really do support this everywhere in Europe. So, and every parliamentarian in the European Parliament voted, or almost every parliamentarian voted for this. So my sense is that we can do this, and that it's just a question of moving some political systems that are kind of stuck in not trusting the voters. But I think the majorities are solid, really.
So nevertheless, growing prices.
Growing prices will be
inflation.
Yeah, growing prices will be the price. But I mean, as I showed, the work that Timon, several of you know very well, shows that the likely impact in terms of GDP is probably 2-3% rather than catastrophic, and 2 or 3% European countries should be able to deal with. Spain dealt with like 10 points during the pandemic, and think about it this way. If you're a country, you want over 3% GDP and not have any second round effect, how much do you have to borrow? 3%. You borrow 3% in the markets, you keep people who lost 3% of GDP, you're done. And growing your debt from 60 to 63 or from 100 to 123 is easy. The problem is to have permanently higher pensions or something that grow your debt every year, but one of 3-4% points is not a problem. So if you have a war, you have to issue that debt, you issue it and you're done. If you have a gas hike, you can do it. You can compensate the losers. That's the big trick in economics. We'll discuss how we do compensate the losers, how we avoid the winners getting even more wins. But you can do it. You have enough cash for that. Do we have any of the Zoomers asking us?
Well, there are 2 questions.
Okay.
Okay. Hello. So I'll be talking on behalf of the Zoom audience, and there were 2 questions, and both of them
did stay. Our Zoomers did stay through the bomb.
There are at least 16.
Okay. Good.
Zoomers who are not us. I know that there are also.
Okay.
I don't count myself. Okay, so there were 2 questions, and they both are political. So basically, one person wants to ask your opinion. Give me a second. It's about Germany. Yeah, people really want to know your opinion about the political capital. So the question is, Can you comment on the difficulty to build the political capital for leaders to take such decisions, about sanctions and everything? And what's going on with Scholz and his political capital?
Yeah, it's very political decision about political capital.
Yeah,
a political discussion. So we are part of the governing coalition. There is a liberal party in Germany, the FDP, which is the sister party of the party I am in parliament with, which is Renew Europe. And I think that there are forces in the coalition that are pushing for more action, mostly liberals and the Greens. And the socialists have had a very strong reaction always to Russia. They always think that it's dangerous to, or that they want to atone for the war. They thought they fought with Russia, so Germany should be friends of Russia now. So it's very difficult for them to change that view suddenly. They did a big change when they said they were going to spend more money in defense, but they haven't done the whole change. So I hope the Social Democratic Party of Germany changes. The CDU is good, the Popular Party. Liberals and Greens are also in the right direction. So I hope the Chancellor, they seem to always react late, but they always end up reacting. That's my take.
Okay, 1 second, please. There were some other questions, but I think you actually covered them because there were questions about sanctions and everything and everything we just discussed. I also know that you have a quite packed schedule. You need a train to catch.
And to have
and to rest and to have some meetings. So
it's very good to be here. And I am really impressed by what you guys doing. And I'm happy that we did it in person, even if it was kind of not fully at the end the way we expected. But thanks to the people following online. Thanks to all of you.
Well, I will show everyone.
Okay, so let's take a picture.
Let's take a screenshot. Okay, so thank you very much for attending this online event.
Nobody took a screenshot of you.